School's out for summer. School's out forever. Welcome to Sup Media Reviews, the podcast that never needs spoiler alerts because it takes you back in time to relive the nostalgia of classic TV shows and films that you've probably already seen. I'm your host, Kiara, and each week I'll dive into the archives to bring you my take on movies and TV shows from at least 20 years ago. From cult classics to forgotten gems, I'll review them all and give my honest opinion on their impact and whether or not they still hold up today. Join me as we revisit the iconic characters, memorable moments, and timeless themes that made these shows and films so special. So take a break from adulting and get ready for a trip down memory lane with Sup Media Reviews. What is up, home slices? For today's review, we had so many good thoughts, so much good analysis that we actually had to divide this episode into 2 parts. So this is going to be part 1 of that series. So make sure when you're done with this episode that you go wherever you listen to podcasts and check out part 2. What's up, home slices? Thanks so much for tuning into Sup Media Reviews. I'm your host, Kiara, and it's March, Women's History Month. Over the next 4 weeks, we're going to be reviewing and celebrating women-led movies and shows from different genres, and we'll have a few special guests join in along the way. For our very first Women's History Month review, we're going to discuss Ladies in Horror by diving into the iconic 1996 slasher film, Scream. The movie features Neve Campbell as Sydney, Courtney Cox as Gail Weathers, David Arquette as Deputy Dewey, and Drew Barrymore as Casey. Y'all, I actually realized that I had never seen Scream. We'll talk about that later. But I was reminded of this film when my special guest for today brought it up while we were having lunch one day. Today's special guest is Beth. We are friends and coworkers, and I'm really happy to have her here to help me with this review. Say hi, Beth.
Hey, everybody. Excited to be here.
Yes, I'm excited to have you. Thanks for joining me. Beth is a super fan of Scream, so I'm excited to hear some of her insights. As always, here are some fun facts about the movie. The first fun fact is that Matthew Lillard was cast as Stu Macher by chance after accompanying his then-girlfriend to an unrelated audition taking place elsewhere in the same building. Casting director Lisa Beach saw Lillard in the hallway and asked him to audition for the part. He got into the role with incredible ferocity. What do you think about this fun fact, Beth?
I actually said this to a coworker earlier. I was like, if you can tell me a fun fact about Scream that I don't know, I'll be really shocked. And that was one I don't know. So kudos to you.
Wow. Well, yeah, that's crazy. Some of these things are really just like chance encounters. All right, the second fun fact is that the use of caller ID increased more than 3-fold after the release of this film. Now, fun fact about caller ID, it's a fun fact inside of a fun fact. How meta. Dr. Shirley Ann Jackson, the first Black woman to earn a doctorate degree from MIT, conducted the telecommunications research that would eventually lead to the invention of caller ID, call waiting, fiber optic cables, solar cells, and more. Shout out to Dr. Jackson for being a lady pioneer in telecommunications.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Do you remember caller ID?
Oh, yeah.
I don't think I remember a time when there wasn't caller ID. Or if I was just too young.
It was a glorious time and one very, very different from today.
Yes. I would just imagine someone calling you and you just have to like roll the dice. You never know who it is.
Exactly.
And in our third fun fact, Jamie Kennedy was chosen for the role of Randy because he would often improvise humor into his lines, which made director Wes Craven laugh. Beth, what's your opinion on Jamie Kennedy?
I have a love-hate relationship with Jamie Kennedy, honestly. I think he's so brilliant in movies like this, which I obviously love, so I'm a little bit biased. And then he has like Malibu's Most Wanted, which I think you like, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's just so, like, it's not for me. I'm okay with it. Oh, it's a little too on all the time.
Look, I personally don't know how to feel about him either. Malibu's Most Wanted, he plays a questionable, appropriative character.
Yes.
And I just, as a kid, when I was growing up, it was funny. But as a woke adult, not so much.
But that they're making fun of it, though, I think that's kind of part of the trope, right? They're making fun of him.
I don't know. I'm really on the fence. I also watched a cheesy show called Ghost Whisperer, and I actually really liked his character on that show.
Oh.
he could hear ghosts, and he was still funny. His character on that show was enjoyable, even though the show is freaking awful, which I later found out.
That's the Jennifer Love Hewitt one, right?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Teen slashers unite. I like it.
Right. So yeah, I literally don't know how to feel about him. I'm kind of on the fence with him as well.
On that same note, can I add another fun fact that we'll probably get to more later? Matthew Lillard, who I do love and is incredible, is also in this film, as you mentioned. And he improvised most of his, no spoilers, but let's just say his last few lines of the movie. And he is incredible. Most of it was not scripted. And if you haven't seen the movie, you should watch it just for that scene.
That comes across as totally believable to me.
He just went off the rails, let's be honest.
Yeah, that sounds right. Well, yeah, if you want to check out Scream, unfortunately, you'll have to rent it as of the recording of this episode. As always, I enjoy renting movies from Amazon Prime because of the X-Ray IMDb feature. They do not sponsor this, but if they want to, I'm here. So now's the part of the show where we get into our personal connections. Beth, tell us your personal connection to this film, and without getting into too many details, what makes it so iconic to you?
Oh, those are like two separate questions in my mind. Why it was really my first horror movie, scary movie that I watched. It came out in 1996. I think I was 9 at the time, maybe 8. And I'm the youngest of 4. And my older sister had loved it. And I love my older sister. She's incredible. So I wanted to be like her. So got really, really into it. And then kind of fell in love with the horror genre. Which brings me to the second part of the question is, this movie revitalized horror pretty much. In 1996, when it first came out, there was nothing really, really going on. In the 70s, 80s, there was all the slasher flicks for Halloween, Friday the 13th, etc. It was huge. And then it died for over a decade. And Scream really revitalized it. So as somebody who really appreciates horror from a young age, I really appreciate what this did for the franchise.
Oh, nice. I don't think I recognize the history, but I do feel like there is a considerable gap between like the mid 80s and mid 90s where there weren't a lot of really iconic films, where it was more so like a bunch of sequels of the 70s and 80s movies. So that makes a lot of sense.
Exactly. So yeah, a ton of sequels happened at that time. And then it kind of kicked off everything. We think of the Nightmare on Elm Street remakes, or even like I Know What You Did Last Summer, throwback to Jennifer Love Hewitt, or The House of Wax. Like they started coming up with these almost teen-like movies of the horror genre that I don't think would have existed if Scream didn't exist. They also did their own sequels, which we can talk about if we want to, but that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, for me, my personal connection to Scream is very limited. To be honest, I thought I had watched this movie, and then like 75% through the way, as I was taking notes, I was like, I don't know what's going to happen. I've never seen this movie before. And I was actually confusing it with Scary Movie, which is, you know, a parody of these types of movies. So yeah, again, personal connection is super limited because I had never seen it before. And I may have actually seen a sequel at some point. I don't freaking know. But I recognize how iconic teen slashers are. Like this, and I Know What You Did Last Summer, and how they are like a big part of pop culture, and particularly like 90s and 2000s pop culture. They're referenced quite often in other works, and the Scream mask is like super iconic, and whenever you see it, you know exactly what it is. This movie in particular is really interesting because it took inspiration from other slasher films like Halloween or Friday the 13th, and now newer films take inspiration from it, like specifically Scary Movie. So I feel like it's cool that it's kind of sandwiched between like being inspired by older movies and now inspiring like the current works. So it's really interesting that it's kind of sandwiched in there.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point where Scream is so self-aware. Like the whole thing references movies the entire time. And it does play on a lot of older horror movie tropes, especially the big ones. I don't know if a Scary Movie counts as referencing Scream, but I love so much. I'm like literally laughing out loud about you thinking for at least 45 minutes the Scary Movie and Scream were the same thing, because it's, yeah.
Okay, look, you have to watch Scary Movie again, because Scary Movie is like a parody of
it is
like scary movies and the tropes, right? But if I remember correctly, Scary Movie is super based, like probably 75% of it is based on Scream, like specifically.
It is, which another fun fact, when Scream was first written, the title of the movie was Scary Movie.
Oh.
It wasn't supposed to be Scream until after shooting.
Nice. Well, I also want to point out that Scary Movie was created by the Wayans brothers. So yay for Black History, which I love that is like such an, also this kind of iconic parody franchise too. So yeah, it's all good. I also want to say that the cast in this movie is pretty successful and iconic. I feel like in a number of scary movies, it's pretty hard for people to be breakout stars, kind of. Like, for instance, in Friday the 13th, only Kevin Bacon kind of went on to be known, you know, and have like a great career. This movie, on the other hand, like almost everyone in this movie has gone on to have fantastic careers. So I think it's pretty cool that a lot of big stars are in this movie.
Yeah, I think that's a great call out. I think they were also at like their prime at this. Even Courtney Cox trying to not be Monica Geller from Friends and her personality is so different but very, very similar is really interesting. David Arquette and Courtney Cox actually met on the scene of Scream before they got married. Fun fact, I'm also like, was Kevin Bacon in Friday the 13th? Did I just like miss that completely? So yeah. Again, another fun fact.
You said Courtney Cox was married to who?
David Arquette. That's where they met.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
Had no idea.
You shouldn't. It doesn't matter at all. But
I know the characters went on to be married. I didn't know that they were married.
yeah. And
Quite
then they
interesting.
returned in Scream 4 after their divorce to film another movie. And they're always curious how awkward that was.
Jeez. Yeah, you never marry your coworkers. That's kind of funny, but for reasons I won't say.
You know my husband works at our company, right?
I know.
Just put that out there real quick. And very different teams.
That's quite true. It's a large company, then, you know, you would never know. But listeners, in the comments, let us know why you think Scream is iconic. I'm super excited for us to dive into this movie, so let's chat. All right, so we open up the movie with the title of the movie and a little scream in the background, and we see a blonde Drew Barrymore in a large house alone. She begins receiving phone calls from who she thinks is a prank caller or a wrong caller. So this person calls back a few times and kind of starts a conversation with her while she's making old school popcorn on the stove. I have never made popcorn this way. It's kind of fascinating to me.
You never had Jiffy Pop?
No.
Yeah. It's like in every Blockbuster video. I'm aging myself now. And like every, like in the checkout stands where you go like Blockbuster Hollywood video, it's always right there.
Oh, look, we went to Blockbuster quite a bit, but it was always the regular like microwave popcorn. I assume it's safer. I don't know. Like you don't have to put it on the stove. Easier for kids.
You don't shake it as much. Yeah.
Yeah. So she puts the old school popcorn on the stove and she talks to the caller about scary movies, and things start to get a little sinister when he asks her for her name so he can know who he's looking at. And so she sounds concerned at his phrasing and she's like, what? So he corrects himself. But then right then a dog barks and Drew Barrymore's character Casey looks outside. So she's starting to freak out and ends up hanging up on the guy. What do you think about this weird call situation?
I think it's something that would never happen today. Like, how many people answer their phone for a number they don't know? And to your point about caller ID earlier, it's such an interesting time for this movie to exist, which I think this movie's amazing. I think it held up. Sorry, spoiler, but it's a throwback almost to like a simpler time, but technology still exists. Like, nobody would answer their phone nowadays.
Yeah, either they wouldn't answer at all or just block it real fast. It's so easy. Easy to block numbers these days. But like you said, it's a simpler time, right? Almost 30 years ago. Yeah. So the guy calls back and she hangs up again. She's now visibly upset. I think it's exacerbated by the fact that she's kind of in this big house alone. And they also live in a pretty rural area and there aren't other people close by, which is something that I didn't really think about in this movie. Like the environment that they're in is actually quite good for a slasher film. Yeah, for whatever reason, I didn't think they would be kind of isolated like they are. And all these people are kind of freaking rich. What do you think about, does the movie have any commentary on affluence at all?
Oh, this movie does not have a lot of commentary on anything that's socially aware, let's be honest. Yeah, no, I think they are all very well off in this like California town. I don't think exists and all part of a certain socioeconomic standing. To this day, I don't like windows. Like, people standing in front of windows in like movies or shows or anything. I'm like, what are you doing? People can see you. Like my partner and I, like, he has his window open all the time. Like his blinds open all the time. I'm like, it's dark. People can see in. Like, what are you doing? So clearly had a lasting effect. But yeah, to your question, no, I don't think this film comments on anything related to that. But yes, everybody has glorious houses with no parents, except for the beginning.
Yes, yeah, and I'll bring that up a little bit later. But at this point, the caller calls her back, so she curses at him. She's getting annoyed. She's afraid. She's alone. But then he escalates quickly. And he's like, listen, you little B word, you hang up on me again, I'll gut you like a fish. And I was like, whoa. Personally, again, at this point, I thought I was watching a movie that I had seen before. So I was like, oh, yes, I don't remember this. But Casey, of course, gets startled. And so she starts locking the doors. And I'm like, girl, why weren't the doors already locked? You are home alone. And I understand they're like kind of out in the middle of nowhere. And the chances of a break-in probably feel small. But just for my own sanity, I couldn't be in a house alone with the doors not locked. But I don't understand.
My doors are locked all the time. Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, I mean, again, we live in a different time. But true. Casey threatens to call the police, but the caller says the police won't make it in time. Again, which means that this environment is ripe because, like, there's not a good response time because of the type of place they live in. And so this is where I was like, maybe this is a commentary on wealth in suburbia and, like, the illusion of safety in upper class neighborhoods. But you don't think so at all. So I just...
I'm often wrong. So I love that take. I think that's an interesting one that I hadn't considered.
Yeah. But yeah, even by today's standard, the house that Casey was in is actually still nice. Like if I walked into a house that was decorated like that, it wouldn't look that dated to me. I actually thought it was a really nice house. But Casey, of course, gets more freaked out as the caller escalates, and he's like, I want to see what your insides look like. And she gets startled by the doorbell, and she's like, who's there? And then she's hanging up. The guy's calling back. The caller calls again. Casey's crying and upset. She's like, my boyfriend's going to be here soon, and you should just leave me alone. And so she's, of course, slowly backing up towards the patio doors. And when she's instructed to turn on her patio lights by the caller, she sees her boyfriend, Steve, tied to a chair and kind of like beaten up and whatnot. And when she tries to go outside to like see about him or untie him, the caller discourages her from leaving the house and uses Steve as a weird bargaining chip to play a game where he asks a question, and if she gets it right, Steve lives. She gets the first warm-up question right about who's the killer in Halloween, but she gets the real question, the killer in Friday the 13th, wrong, because it's kind of a trick question. Because it's Jason Voorhees' mother that's the actual killer in the first movie. So
I love that part. Like, if you think of Friday the 13th,
really?
Everybody thinks of Jason. But the first movie doesn't have anything to do with Jason. It's all about Mrs. Voorhees. And it's a way creepier movie than just the Jason goes to Vegas or whatever it is that came afterwards that people think about. So I love that they actually played on the fact that even scary movie trivia in people's minds is wrong because so much time has passed. I think that's one of the beauties of the film.
Yeah. So I have reviewed Friday the 13th on Set Media Reviews with my father, who is a really big movie buff. And I actually really enjoyed it. Like, we watched Halloween as well, and I actually didn't care for Halloween that much. But Friday the 13th, I was like, this is my kind of movie. It was great. I enjoyed it. But yeah, the fact that Jason was not the actual villain in the first movie is an overlooked fact. So, of course, in the moment, Casey is freaking out. There's no way she could think critically anyway. And that's kind of the point. So in this weird scene, because she got the question wrong, Steve gets kind of mangled or whatever. Casey looks outside and we can hear Steve's flesh being ripped. And we could see Steve die, like, from the shoulders up. So when she turns on the patio light, the camera shows Steve full length and one of his hands is missing and he's been disemboweled. But because the lights were out, she actually did not see the killer. She's, of course, freaking out. Her boyfriend's dead. She probably blames herself. She goes to the kitchen. Okay. Casey is really freaked out now, and the caller asked his final question, which is, what door am I at? And then the killer throws a chair through the patio doors, and Casey runs to the kitchen where she grabs a large knife. And by now, there's a small fire in the kitchen, and she actually sees the killer in the house, like down the hall, which is freaky. And of course, he is dressed in a, long kind of caped robe with the scream mask on. She exits the house out of the, back kitchen door, and she watches as the killer kind of looks for her in the house. She sees a car coming up the road, which is her parents coming home. And that's where I started thinking, like, was her boyfriend supposed to be there so they could sneak around or hang out? Because her parents came home kind of fast. I don't know if they timed that right or if her parents came home early or what.
Like, just starting a movie based on the popcorn.
Right. And so this is where we can actually see that they're in a rural area, right? And so she tries to make a break for it, but the killer spots her and tries to attack her. And then she boops him with the phone that she's holding. Do you see how big that phone was? Those home phones.
I had that phone, let's be honest. As a child.
We haven't. Yes, we had a couple of home phones that I remember as well. I don't remember them being that chunky though. So she like boops him on the head a few times with the phone, and I'm like, that phone is heavy, so I get it. And so she's still running. She hasn't called the police yet for whatever reason. And the person who is portraying Ghostface right now would be an excellent person to use when police are trying to keep like a suspect on the phone so they can trace a call. Like, he knows how to keep you on the phone. Like.
So a fun fact about that is they actually used a landline for the calling, and somebody locally picked up on it and thought an actual like stalker murder was happening, and so called the police. So the entire production was shut down for a little bit while the police investigated what they were doing.
Wow. They should probably like alert people.
Yeah. Simpler time.
Back when I was a police dispatcher for the LSU Police Department, there were a couple of theaters on campus, and there was a theater that would have to use like fake guns for productions, and they would have to call the police department to let us know that if anyone called about a gunshot, they were actually using fake guns at the theater. Like, they could have done something similar. Just
way to be responsible, LSU.
Yes.
These guys clearly were not.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. But yeah, Casey eventually makes it to the side yard, but she is stabbed in the chest by the killer and in the neck also. So she kind of loses her ability to speak. Her parents get home and Casey isn't able to warn them. She kind of barely misses them because she can't speak. And they walk into the house and Casey loses strength at the porch and removes the killer's mask before he finally stabs her to death right as her parents, are entering the home and finding all the damage and Steve's dead body. When the mom tries to call the police, Casey still has the phone and her mom can kind of hear her calling for her mother in a whisper as she's being dragged across the lawn. The dad instructs the mom to go down the road to a neighbor's house to use the phone since their phone isn't working. And when she goes outside, she, of course, like screams to the top of her lungs because they find Casey hanging from a tree. What an iconic opening scene.
That's what I was about to say. It's like, that's the first, 15 minutes?
Yes.
Of the entire movie. It's an iconic opening scene, as you said. And what's great is the way they publicized this was Drew Barrymore as the star. And then she's dead in 10 minutes.
Right.
That's insane. But yeah, actually, I don't love the scene with the parents personally, but
yeah,
as a teenager, I didn't mind it. And as an adult, I'm like, oh, that's really traumatizing. But the fact that the main star of the show, I mean, think of Drew Barrymore versus Neve Campbell today, or especially back in the mid-90s, Drew Barrymore was the iconic star. And the marketing of that was just genius.
Yeah, they knew how to work it. They figured out the marketing ploy real fast. Sure. Yes. So yeah, next up we switch the scene where we see main character Sydney, played by Neve Campbell. She's in a nightgown in a room where she's startled by the sound of her boyfriend Billy sneaking into her 2-story bedroom window. Now, because Neve screamed while she was startled, her dad comes in to check things out and, what's going on in here. But when he doesn't find anything, we learn that he's going to be out of town until Sunday at a conference. So he heads to bed, and then Billy, talks to his girlfriend, and he does this weird speech about how their relationship used to be R-rated and it's now down to like a rated for television rating. So Billy is played by Skeet Ulrich, who is actually, I think he's a really attractive guy, but in this movie, I don't find him to be attractive. I don't know what it is. I want to say it's his hair, but in general, he's like a really attractive guy, but like the hair in the face. And I'm like, I know he's supposed to be kind of like the 90s bad boy look with longer hair, but I hate it a little bit. I don't like it.
Oh, he was the next Johnny Depp in his day, like the most iconic one, right? Like they have similar bone structure, the hair. He's like Yeah, he was channeling a look, I think.
Yeah.
I've listened to quite a few of your podcasts, and I agree with you on very attractive people in the past. The Mummy comes to mind because everybody in that movie is beautiful. But Skeelers, yeah, not for me. That's neither here nor there.
Oh,
Feel free to edit it out. But yeah, no, I think he was like such a Johnny Depp next at his early ages.
Yeah, I completely see that. I do. Yes. So right away, we see that Sydney is kind of a good girl that doesn't want to do real sex with Billy. And so Billy's like, I just want to do some over the clothes stuff, which is hilarious. I don't know. That was so funny to me. Just the whole teenage angst situation. It's just hilarious. And so she ends up sending him away before they can get too hot and heavy with a peek at her boobs to graduate their relationship to PG-13.
Would you settle for a PG-13 relationship after he's talking about how The Exorcist was edited for television? It's weird to think about, like a horror, like a movie with people dying. It's terrible. It's hilarious. This movie's hilarious.
Yes. I don't know. It makes me think of high school and like the kind of things that are on our mind. We're in that developmental stage. Yeah. But it's just quite funny in this particular setting. But yeah, Billy is pressuring her to have sex and she's not, into it quite yet. And right away, they are making these contrasts between Sydney and Casey. We got the blonde girl, we got the brunette girl. We get the girl who invited her boyfriend to visit while her parents were out, and then the one that won't have sex with her boyfriend. In this movie, like you mentioned earlier, it's very kind of self-aware and self-referential in some ways. What is your thought on like this particular trope of like the blonde gets killed and the virgin brunette survives?
Well, I mean, the whole virgin survives the final girl has been iconic since, slasher films first came along. If you think of like Strobe and Halloween, there's this whole thing about the final girl who survives as long as she's good, as long as she's a virgin, as long as she takes care of the kids, takes care of herself. I think Sydney actually, as the story progresses, goes beyond that, and not necessarily in terms of sex, but also just in terms of who she is, and tries to embody like a strong, independent woman, which sounds like such a cliche. And it is such a cliche. But she actually kind of took the horror genre into the 90s with her whole demeanor. And even the flashing and PG-13 relationship, as funny as it is, was like, cool, yeah, no, my sexuality is my thing. So you're going to deal with it on my terms a little bit, which I actually think is really empowering.
That's actually quite interesting. I feel like she fits a little tighter into the trope than I think you do. But I do see that her attitude is a little bit different when it comes to the actual like action of the film. So I agree on that part. But yeah, I want to point out that as soon as I saw Neve Campbell, I was like, she looks old to me. I was like, no way she's in high school. And so I looked up her age when she filmed this movie and she was 23. And Drew Barrymore, I think, was 21. Skeet Ulrich was like 26. And I'm like, y'all, we can't be these middle-aged teenagers. I can't stand it. I can't. Can we get some real teenagers? I don't know. That bothers me.
That was a huge thing from the beginning of movies until probably the 2000s, right? If you think of Grease or even like what's something newer, I'm probably going to age myself a lot, but like One Tree Hill, right? Like all those people are in their mid to late 20s of things. Yeah. Even a Fresh Prince, which I know you reviewed, which is one of my favorites. I mean, that did a pretty good job. Will Smith was relatively young when it started, and then they kept him the same age for like 3 years. So I think it was a ploy to try to get people to keep watching. But yeah, agreed. Those people do not look 17.
Right. No. It's like, that man got a mortgage. Like, don't. He's not going to physics. Like, don't try to play me.
Alrighty, these men's going to physics. Let's be honest.
Yes. But yeah, so in the next scene, police and press are buzzing outside of Woodsboro High School in Woodsboro, California. We learned from the press that 2 teens were murdered last night, the ones we saw, Casey and Steve. And the press and police are using the school to get information about the crime. Tatum, a new character we're introduced to, is played by Rose McGowan, and she is a blonde friend of Sydney's. And because she's blonde, she's probably gonna die. But she loops Sydney in about the killings. Sydney had no idea, and that everyone in the school is being interrogated so that the police can find the killer. I assume they decided to make that the starting place because these were both students. So Tatum also hints that this crime is worse than a crime that happened before, but she doesn't say much. So I'm like, what is she talking about? We get into that later. Sydney, of course, is concerned because she actually sat next to Casey, and eventually she gets called into Principal Henry Winkler's office. I was surprised to see Henry Winkler.
I have more fun facts. Let's be honest.
Go
Oh,
ahead.
he's so good. He's so good. Okay, so Henry Winkler, amazing. I also love him in this film. He's creepy as fuck. Sorry.
He is.
He's creepy AF. So in some research I did, and also I listened to the director and writer commentary because I'm terrible, but he didn't want to be credited for the film to not take away attention from the younger actors, which does not seem likely, to be honest.
What do you mean? You don't think it's true?
Well, no, it seems like he probably said that, but like, I don't think he would. So I think it was kind of like him being the Fonz. It was him being like, I'm a big deal. Come on.
Okay.
It's like the Anchorman meme. I don't know if you know this, but I'm kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
Moment. And I just think that's hilarious for a man of his age.
Yeah, I could see you thinking it was more of a cheeky response.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so I'm going to call him Principal Winkler. Principal Winkler invites Sydney into the office. It's her turn to be interrogated by two officers. One is Sheriff Burke and the other is Deputy Riley, aka Do It. And we, of course, learn a lot more about him later. Right as Sydney is walking in, Principal Winkler says she's the daughter of, and kind of trails off. And I'm like, what is this mystery crime? And of course, by this time, I'm like, dang, I don't remember this. That's because I've never seen it. But we don't witness them questioning her. But we do see the weird principal grab Sydney's chin during the interrogation. And I was like, what is this man doing?
Oh, yeah. He's so creepy,
Why is he
right?
touching her. Yes. Yes, he came off as a total creep. And I was like, something's off about him, right? And I think that's maybe supposed to be some misdirection. But even then, I'm like, no, I'm more creeped out than anything. But over the loudspeaker, later on, he announces some tips for the kids to get home safely, but not before saying, your principal loves you. And I'm like, this man is weird. Did you pick up on that? Your principal loves you?
He's, again, I said it, he's super effing creepy. Touches the chin, the principal loves you. When he touches her chin, and I think it's the police chief or whatever looks at Deputy Dewey, and he's picking up on how weird that is.
Yes.
But she doesn't react. So it has to be like a normal thing. Like there's a lot of layers there.
Yeah, it was weird. Yeah. But next up, we see Sydney, Billy, Tatum, her boyfriend, Stuart, who's played by Matthew Lillard, and Randy, who's played by Jamie Kennedy, discussing their interrogations and the murders. Now, Sydney is coming across as really naive in this moment when she's asking about their interrogations, and Stuart, who dated Casey at one point, but is now dating Tatum, is like a major butthole, and he's not giving the crimes the type of gravity that you would expect. The guys are kind of just being really crass about it, and they aren't taking things too seriously. You have any thoughts about this scene?
Yes, so I have so many thoughts about the scene. I think part of it is like what you're supposed to expect is like the boys are being so crass because they're insensitized. They don't care. They're men, right? And it's the 90s, and that's what men do. I love Tatum's like, a woman could easily be the killer line. But I think the personal interactions, the eye contact that happens in the scene is really, really interesting. Also, I don't know if you're going to get to this, so sorry if it's a spoiler, but Randy, Jamie Kennedy, has a line of, you better live her alone. Liver. Sorry, that's the word, but yeah, it's just hilarious to me because apparently I still have a 16-year-old's humor, but.
Yes. We get to see their interactions as friends and their kind of banter. And we see Matthew Lillard's character as the jokester. We see Randy's kind of love for movies a little bit. And we see Billy, who's like, is kind of reprimanding Stuart for being so crass about what's going on, right? And with some concern for how like Sydney in particular, who's a very sensitive virgin, is taking in everything.
So I think it's interesting. Like, I don't think it's necessarily Sydney is a virgin taking in everything, but like, this is one of those times where, like, Sydney is a virgin because he wants to have sex. That comes in. But also, it's like, is he just being a really protective boyfriend? Because it's like, clearly something happened. She's the daughter of scenario that happened in the previous scene. It's almost like, oh, does he care about her enough to stick up to his friends, which is rare, I think, in high school.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Yeah. Sydney gets dropped off at home, and she has a nice house with a well-manicured lawn, a huge patio deck, and a mountainous view. This house is real. It's worth millions. today. And so Tatum and Sydney via phone make plans for later for Sydney to stay at Tatum so she won't have to be home alone on the weekend because, of course, her dad is out of town. So Sydney packs a bag and she sits down to watch TV. They pretend to scare us when she opens a closet. So she watches TV for a little bit where every channel is covering the story of the teen murders. We learned that Sydney's mom, Maureen, was killed a year earlier. According to this particular news story, she was sexually assaulted and found dead not far from the town square. Now, Sydney lays down around 6:45. Tatum is supposed to come at 7 and she falls asleep. And around 7:15, she gets a call from Tatum saying that she's going to be late. Her practice ran long. She's going to come over after going to the video store. So, of course, Tatum's not going to be there right away. So right after she gets off the phone with Tatum, she gets a similar call from the killer, similar to the one that Casey got, assuming that it's Randy playing around on the phone. So right away, we see that Sydney is responding to the call a little differently than Casey did. Sydney comes across as kind of annoyed. She has very clear answers. She's not playing coy the same way that Casey was because she thinks she knows who she's talking to, right? And so the killer is like, well, I'm not Randy and I'm calling from your front porch. And then this idiot goes on her front porch. I think this is such a stupid move, but she goes on the front porch to call this person's bluff, leaving the front door open. So when she doesn't see anyone, she picks her nose to see if he can see her. What do you think of this scene? I find this scene to be pretty iconic, the nose picking.
I have a lot of thoughts on everything. So to back up just a little bit before the scene, so there's been like death and murder and like trauma. Like, you're gonna take a nap? You're just gonna fall asleep real quick? Like trauma's exhausting, but I'm like, you're just gonna go to sleep? Okay, that seems a little weird right now. But all right, one of my least favorite lines is in that scene, but that's a me thing. It's fine. The peanut things, yeah. I candidly do not believe in a lot of things. I'm like, cool, I will call your bluff by saying Bloody Mary in a mirror 3 times. I actually probably wouldn't. But also there's just like basic principles of safety. And why? Like this could just be me becoming an adult of being like, girl, what the F are you doing? Get back inside, play it safe. Even if you're calling somebody's bluff, you don't need to. Like, who are you trying to prove? And that's what the most interesting thing about Cindy is, I think, is like, she's so strong, she's so interesting, but also she still has a sense to prove herself.
Yeah, there's a lot of that going on for Sydney in a few ways. But yeah, I thought it was a crazy move. Super crazy.
One more comment on that one, and why I loved this for you as a Women's History Month and iconic woman in film is Sydney actually has one of my favorite lines that says, do you like scary movies? Is the question on the phone. She's like, well, why would I? They're all filled with big-breasted girls who can't act, who end up running up the stairs when they should be running out the front door. It's insulting. And I love that because it's so true. And that's how horror movies really depicted women, as weak, as dumb. And the fact that she's calling that out brings back to your point about being self-referential. And I think is really, really interesting about the film and how it progresses.
Yeah, that's a great point. And of course, like you said, as it progresses, they get even deeper into those types of tropes. And so Sydney, in some ways, kind of bucks the system a little bit when it comes to those tropes, and in other ways not so much. So she kind of toes the line.
She does.
So yeah, when she doesn't see anyone on the porch and the caller doesn't respond to like saying he can see her picking her nose, she gets ready to hang up. And he says, if you hang up on me, you'll die just like your mother. So he kind of, insinuates that he killed her mom. And so when she goes back into the house and closes the door, the killer pops out of, the same closet that she opened earlier with a knife. And so Sydney actually puts up a good fight. And that's one thing I enjoy about this movie is that most of the victims in this movie actually put up a pretty good fight when it comes to these scenes, which isn't always a part of a lot of scary movies. But she tries to leave out of the front door, but she had kind of locked herself in. And so she goes up the stairs, which is contrary to what she just said on the phone. And she uses her closet door to stop the killer from entering her bedroom. And so the phone lines are cut. So she uses the internet to call the police. And I was like, I don't know what technology this is, but quick thinking, okay? Do you know what kind of technology she was using?
It was a black background with green text, like...
She used the Matrix to call the police. I don't know.
Yes.
But right then, the killer leaves from her door, and suddenly Billy climbs into her open bedroom window. Billy comforts her, saying that the killer is gone, but then he drops his cell phone, making
What?
Sydney think that he was the caller. So, of course, she's, freaking out, but not trying to show it so much. And so Sydney is like, she runs away, she runs downstairs, and when she opens the door, she finds Dewey, who's played by David Arquette, who is holding the scream mask, and that scares her. And he's like, yeah, I found this outside. He's there presumably because of her 911 message on the computer. But already, Sydney has made a few choices that were like pretty smart and ensured her survival in this particular instance. So we get even more of a kind of contrast between what happened with Casey versus what happened with Sydney.
Yeah, I think even like the cop comment, right? Like we can see maybe not as rural as of an area. Sydney still pretty seems far removed from neighbors, but she still reached out to the police. That's one of the big things with Casey at the beginning, Drew Barrymore at the beginning of, they'll never make it here in time. Cool. Can you still try? Maybe?
Yeah, because she actually never called the police.
Yeah, she never does. And it always is confusing to me. I think, always. Casey does, as you said, boop, I think, which was just adorable. The killer with the phone. She does fight back. Sydney in the scene is like, no, you're not going to get me. I'm going to fight you to the end, which kind of shows some strength. But I also want to take it away from that topic and say the cell phone idea is so interesting, right? Like she sees a cell phone and that's how she gets scared by him.
Yes.
Is again, what's such an interesting part of history, right? Like the early days of cell phone. I remember my sister went to a Sundance movie festival. We lived in Utah at the time. And she was like, oh, you can always tell the directors and the actors and the important people by who are on cell phones. And then it was like a year later, everybody was. And so I just think it captures such a pure moment where not everybody had a cell phone.
Absolutely, yes. That's kind of hilarious. And the old chunky, the old chunky cell phone that was like basically a walkie-talkie, like as far as the look. Yes. But yeah, next thing we know, Billy is getting arrested and he's of course protesting, saying that he didn't do it. And Dewey seems really delighted that he got his collar and even makes a comment that Sydney is tougher than she looks. Now, again, because I thought I knew who the killer was, some of the stuff I was reading into a lot of things that were red herrings, I'll say. Yeah, anyways, right then Tatum pulls up and I realized Tatum and Dewey are siblings. Of course, I was like, dang, why don't I remember that? Because I wasn't watching the same movie. Just so many details are just like blowing my mind now. But anyways, I want to point out that Dewey's character is presumably a little mentally challenged or maybe on the spectrum, but high functioning. I don't know how we feel about that today. This is one of the things that I feel like maybe does not hold up. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I've heard that in other places as well. As somebody who's watched the movie, okay, let's be honest, I can probably quote this movie, but I never really got that. I thought maybe he was like a goofy guy and not necessarily, in hindsight, I think it's an interesting thing and I think they do play it up. I don't know, I keep going back and forth on this. I think if that's the case, then yes, that's an issue. I think they were playing for just the dumb homeboy cop, like the dumb small town guy who became a cop, is what I think they were going with. So if you think about things, if you think about things like Asperger's or autism, they don't act the way that Dewey does. So I'm kind of more okay with it in the fact that they're not representing mental illness in a negative way, but more of a making fun of dumb homeboy cops. That's going to make me sound terrible. So sorry.
That's actually really interesting. But there were a few things that I felt like tipped me off about Dewey that felt like he actually might have been on the spectrum or had some other kind of mental things going on, because he's 25 and still lives at home with his mom. There's when he introduces himself, or when we meet him in the principal's office and Sydney calls him Dewey, he's like, I'm Deputy Riley right now. Like, or the way he interacts with his sister, even though she's way younger than him, she's probably 8 years younger than him, in the way that she kind of treats him. I feel like that there was actually some developmental things that were supposed to be going on with him, as opposed to like just the guy that kind of didn't grow up and was like not the best at school and just became a cop because that's really the only thing he could do. So that's interesting. that is kind of up for interpretation.
Yeah, I mean, even that's the best he could do is a whole other conversation we could get into. Yeah, no, I agree. And I think he is supposed to be, I don't want to say mentally challenged or slow. Like, that's arbitrary. But, like, I think there was a thing in the early 90s where a goofy guy was also dumb. If you know, like, the movie Dumb and Dumber, like, proved that, right? And so I think they're actually playing off the Dumb and Dumber aspect of it. So there's a scene later on, which, sorry, but, like, he's eating an ice cream cone instead of smoking a cigarette. So I think you make a really, really interesting point of, is he digressed? And I think it's an interesting thing to think about. I don't know if the creators thought about that. Not that they shouldn't have, mind you, but I don't know if that's what the purpose of it was. And again, sometimes the purpose should be considered. It's not.
Yeah. We'll talk more about that later, too. So I think it'll come up later in my notes as well. Well, we see Gail Weathers, who is played by Courtney Cox. She is a kind of tabloid reporter who pops up at the house right as Sydney is being taken away by the cops and is trying to get the scoop on what went down. She comes across as a reporter who will do anything to get the story and is actually quite mean to the cameraman. Mm-hmm. What do you think about Gail's character?
I love Gail so much. She's so terrible. Like, you hate her.
Yes.
Like, she's mean. She's insulting. She's just cruel. Back to what I said at the beginning with Courtney Cox of, I think she was really trying not to be Monica Geller and from Friends to an extreme. And Monica was always extreme for anybody who watched Friends. But I think she was trying to be harder by being in this movie. And then it ended up being kind of like a comedy horror movie. So it's actually kind of funny. Mm-hmm. I think she's hilariously terrible.
Yeah, she's pretty awful.
Yeah,
in this film, but Courtney does a great job portraying Gail.
Yes,
exactly. So next up, we're at the police station. Dewey can't seem to get in touch with Sydney's dad. We also see Billy and his father are answering questions that Sheriff Burke is asking, who was the older police officer that we saw earlier. Now, the sheriff is suspicious of Billy's cell phone, which again is pretty funny today. But at this point, it's not looking good for Billy, especially since he snuck into Sydney's room the previous night as well. Mm-hmm. So they have to hold him until the phone records come back. Gail, of course, shows up at the police station along with some other news vans or whatever, and she tries to bogart her way into the station. And already she was getting on my nerves, personally.
Fair.
She just kind of was walking in like she owned the place, basically. But of course she gets stopped. So Dewey reveals in the police station that the Scream mask is common and that they can't trace the purchase. They also won't know about the phone records until the morning. So they have to, keep Billy till the morning. Tatum comes in and demands that she take Sydney home despite Dewey's wishes. Tatum is very mean to her brother and embarrasses him in front of his colleagues. What do you think of their relationship?
Tatum bugs me. I think Rose McGowan's great in this, but I have an older brother I love and is amazing, but we never got along when we were kids. Well, not never. Mm-hmm. We oftentimes did not get along when we were kids. And I feel like she's overly cruel.
Right. I agree.
Yeah. It makes me feel weird.
Yeah. So Dewey takes them out the back way and runs to the car as Gail and her caravan intercept Sydney and Tatum. So Sydney and Gail have this tense conversation because Gail is writing a book and Gail's responses are like super positive and chipper while Sydney seems hurt by this conversation. Mm-hmm. Again, at this point, I don't know what's going on, right? And so when Gail is like, oh yeah, I'll send you a copy, Sydney decks Gail in the face. And Gail is pissed and she calls Sydney a B word, but something tells me that Gail is more excited about capturing this moment than she is like upset that she got hit in the face. That's just the kind of vibe she gives off to me.
Okay, that's interesting. I never really got that. I think she's more shocked than anything else. I think she's like, oh, I finally got through to her. Bam, but you went down. Sorry.
So there's an adversarial relationship between these two. And at this point, as a new viewer myself, I didn't know what was going on, right?
Yeah, you still didn't know, right? Like what had happened? Okay.
No.
Thank you. I'm so glad you're like grounding me. It's great.
Well, we can surmise by this point, because I think it was Gail that we saw earlier that talked about Maureen earlier. So we can put two and two together a little bit, but we don't know the full story just yet.
No. Yeah.
So but over at Tatum and Dewey's house, Dewey takes the girls home. They're ready for bed. And Sydney gets a call. And it's the killer saying that Billy is the wrong guy and that Sydney has pointed the finger at the wrong guy again. And I was like, again, I was like, I don't remember any details from this movie. By this time, Tatum comes over to Sydney to figure out like what's going on. What is this call about? Sydney's freaking out a little bit. And Tatum and Dewey's mom has already knocked on Dewey's door, and he takes a second to come into the room with his gun right as the call ends. Again, I was misdirected a few times. So there are a number of suspects that we have at this time, right? We got the creepy principal. We got...
my money's on Winkler.
Yes. Creepy Principal Winkler. We got weird Dewey, who's popping up places and talking about how strong Sydney is. And we have Billy also, who just kind of popped up at the house right around the time she was getting attacked. So, we have a lot of people we can point the finger at.
So one comment there is how creepy that scene is like you're staying at a friend's house because you want to feel safe and not alone. Her mom comes in, said, you got a phone call. Once again, back in the day, no cell phones. My dad, no, I don't think it is. So she answers the phone and there's this voice. Hello, Sydney. Like, that's traumatizing.
Yeah.
And terrible, right? It's like you're in a safe place and then you think you're getting a call at a friend's house and it's the person who terrorized you the night before. It's a really interesting scene. But I agree with you that Dewey coming out at the end with the gun out, it's interesting.
Yeah. Sydney's character is interesting to me because she has dealt with a lot of trauma in this movie. Like from her mother dying a year ago, they can't find her dad. They don't know where he is right now. She thinks her boyfriend attacked her. Someone attacked her. Like she's dealing with a very traumatic moment right now. She's handling it way better than I would be handling personally.
Back to the, are you 17?
Wait, what?
Back to the, like, are you a teenager comment?
Oh, that's true. Yes, she's wise beyond her years. Yes. So yeah, it's the next day, and on the news, we see a young Liev Schreiber who's portraying Cotton Weary, an escaped convict who's awaiting appeal for the death sentence for Sydney's mom's murder. We find out that Sydney was a key witness who testified against Cotton, which makes the caller's comments make sense. Right, about her accusing the wrong guy again, right? Dewey tells her that Billy was released because, the phone workers came back and it didn't show anything, and that the police are cross-referencing calls to both Casey and Sydney. Now, weirdly enough, Tatum and Sydney go to school the next day. Am I the only one that's like, what the heck?
Okay, thank you. I have 6 school. Why is she there? Is my note. Like, what? Like,
why did
question
she go
mark,
to
exclamation
school?
point. Yeah, why did she go to school?
She was almost murdered.
Yeah. Why is anybody at school? Like 2 people in a small town were just murdered. Like,
yes. Your mom was murdered a year ago.
take the day off.
Yes. Take the day off. I think it's so weird that they actually went to school. Okay. So Dewey pulls the girls up to the school in his police car, and a reporter asks the weirdest question while shoving a mic in Sydney's face. How does it feel to almost be brutally butchered? The people have a right to know. What kind of question is that?
A fun fact about that was actually Linda Blair, who was star of The Exorcist.
Really?
Reporter. Yeah. She's in the beginning too, but that's her biggest thing.
I have not seen The Exorcist. I actually am quite afraid of The Exorcist. There's some movies where I can go back and watch old movies because they're not really scary anymore to me. The Exorcist is one of those where I don't think I can go there, even the old ones.
It's not my favorite. I don't like it. It's a very well-made movie, iconic. But Linda Blair, once again, back to its taking on the roots of previous horror films. I think it's interesting that, 30 years later, she's in this.
And we get a little bit more of that as well later on. So that's nice. So yeah, I thought that was a crazy question to ask a girl who almost got killed the night before. That's freaking crazy. But Sydney goes over to Gail and they have this real tense conversation, because she previously had just punched her in the face, about the details of her mother's murder and involvement with Cotton off the record. Now, long story short, Cotton's versions of events is that Maureen seduced him while he was inebriated. He had sex with her and then he left, leaving behind his jacket. Now, Gail believes Sydney misidentified the person who was wearing that jacket. Now, the story that Sydney wove for the trial was that Maureen would have never touched Cotton, that he sexually assaulted her, and she saw him leave wearing his coat that was eventually found with her mother's blood on it inside of Cotton's car. Now, Sydney says aloud that she's sure Cotton did it, but Gail picks up on the fact that Sydney now has some doubts given the call from last night. Gail is annoying bullying and is low-key torturing a teenager whose mother passed away. But she is a smart cookie and she is super determined. So from this conversation with Sydney, she surmises that the recent murders, Sydney's attack and Maureen's murder, are all connected. She's obviously going to do some digging, but seems more concerned about her book sales than her ability to save a man from being killed on death row. What do you think about this interaction?
Oh, again, so many thoughts about the things you said in different sections. On the last point you made, she goes through everything you just said and says, with all this information, I could save a man's life. And her cameraman at the time was like, oh, wow, you're a good person. And then she's like, slaps him and says, do you know what that could do for my book sales? Showing she's kind of cold. I think that's actually an interesting part. I think that whole interaction is really important because it shows Sydney's doubt. Mm-hmm. I have a few issues about the police report / investigation that was done. I don't want to go into making this movie heavier than it is, but so I have a few questions about consensual versus not. Overall, I think it's an interesting, important scene to show the two different characters. Sydney's overly defensive, even though she has doubts, and Gail being just cold and heartless.
Yeah. This is where the whole backstory kind of makes a lot of sense for me. Like, it explains all the tension that they are experiencing and all the stuff that kind of is going on in the background that helps to color what's going on. So things are coming together for me, again, as a first-time watcher, unsuspecting first-time watcher. So inside the school, in the hallway, Sydney finally regrets coming to school. And it's like, girl, duh. Like... What were you expecting, okay? So when she asks Stuart about Billy and if he's mad, Stuart actually makes a Candyman reference, which is crazy because I just reviewed that movie a few episodes ago, so check it out. And I also didn't realize it, but the style of the killings is kind of similar to the brutality of Candyman. So I never drew any parallels, but I think it's kind of cool. Did you watch Candyman?
I did watch Candyman. I didn't until the most recent one came out. Probably, 2-3 years ago at this point. And then I watched the original. I actually really enjoyed them both.
Really? I hated them. If you all want to hear my thoughts on Candyman, feel free to check out the episode. It's not good, in my opinion. But,
all right. But I'm telling myself I did not listen to that one of yours, but...
Yes. No,
I really enjoyed both of them. The second one especially, I thought was really interesting.
The latest one I enjoyed. The last one that came out was 2021. I enjoyed it. But yeah, the movie is crazy.
It is.
Yes. Yeah, so just then, someone in the hallway comes wearing a costume and runs down the hall, the Scream costume, right, or the Ghostface costume. And of course, this triggers Sydney, because by now, with all the news and stuff around, the news is spreading about the details of what's happening, right? As she runs away, because of course she's triggered by that, she runs into Billy, who is also at school. Why is he at school?
He just got released from prison. Not prison, jail.
I don't understand why these kids are at school when all this crazy stuff is happening. But weirdly enough, Billy turns the conversation to why Sydney doesn't want to have sex with him. And I was like, is this what you want to be talking about right now? I feel like this conversation is the worst timing. It's not appropriate for the hallway, especially considering that tomorrow will make a year since her mother passed away.
What she brings up.
Yeah, you made this about you real fast. And I was like, oh, this is crazy. And Billy is like, yeah, your mom died a year ago. You should be over that. He was like, I got over my mom leaving my dad and my penis still works. So, so yeah, it should be the same for you. And she's like, no, my mom passed away. Your mom is somewhere existing. I don't know. Billy wants her to be the same girlfriend that she was before her mother died. And I was like, how inconsiderate of him. And I'm straddling this line between he's being inconsiderate and bringing up a very weird topic given the recent series of events. And then he's also portraying a young, horny teenager. And does it make sense for a young, horny teenager to talk about his own needs over the needs of his girlfriend? Kinda yes, I guess. So what do you think about this scene?
I actually agree with both points. So I think when Sydney runs out of the bathroom, it's the emptiest school in the world. Even on hall pass, what school is this empty? So there's that. I love the fact that you think that Billy is just a horny 17-year-old dude. Because that could 100% be true. But it's also just such a weird thing to say. When my mom left town, I got over it. okay, cool. That was like 6 years or whatever time of years ago it was. But either way, I think there's a difference between people leaving and people dying. And as somebody, I don't want to get this too like dark, but like as somebody who's dealt with very, very deep grief, that happens actually a lot in real life of being like, hey, there's this thing that happened to me. I don't talk about it a lot, but you know, it involved death, and people being like, oh yeah, no, this thing happened to me. This not even clearly my dog ran away. Actual story that happened. Oh, wow. So I think it's actually an interesting correlation between human nature of wanting to connect and not knowing how to, and kind of like that emotional stuntness, that's not a word, but like that kind of emotional inability to connect, even though the desire is there, whether that's for good means or, you know, lesser means. And I think for Billy's point, it's, I want something, stop being so dramatic.
Yes.
But it is also just so bizarre.
Yes, it's very crazy. Yeah, people are very awkward when it comes to talking about death, and it becomes almost like a comparison situation. So yeah, I totally understand that. In this moment, I'm just like, this is like a weird ass conversation to be having in a hallway with a girl who almost died the previous night and a guy who was accused of trying to murder her. Like, this is...
And they haven't talked since. Like, this is their first conversation. Let's talk about sex.
A crazy conversation. It was very strange to me, right? So we get a quick scene of Principal Henry Winkler demasking and expelling 2 kids who wore the Scream mask on campus and, you know, kind of running through the halls. And then in a crazy weird part of this scene, he uses a large pair of scissors to say that, you know, it would be better or more fair if he hung them from trees and disemboweled them to show how heartless they are. And he's like wielding these scissors in like a threatening manner. And I'm like, what is going on with this principal? Something is off with this man.
But it's Henry Winkler, and it's just like, again, it's like people are dying and that's sad, but it's so rarely. Like, I'm having a hard time not laughing just thinking about it. So he's a weird character. He's so creepy. I agree. It's aggressive and it's weird. Yes. And these kids were, in all fairness, very, you know, supportive and aware of the trauma that those around them are dealing with. It seems like a small town. That's the other weird thing. It's like a big school for a small town. But they're running through the halls celebrating death, essentially, of one of their classmates. Why is the school even open? It's an odd thing. But his reaction is extreme, similar to
it's over the top, yeah.
Yeah, chin touching, your principal loves you. It's like everything he does is very over the top.
I agree. And I feel like in my experience as a student, there are teachers like that. But in this movie, it's a little different because somebody's murdering kids. So it's like, should we suspect him? I don't know. But yeah, in the next scene, Sydney goes into the bathroom where she hears 2 girls gossiping. They're in the stall, so she goes into a different stall so that they don't see her. And so she kind of overhears how they're gossiping about her. And interestingly enough, she does not confront them, which I was like, if Sydney's so strong, you know, maybe she would confront them. But she doesn't. We do find out a few things from the gossiping girls, that not everyone believes Sydney's story about being attacked. We also learned that Maureen had a history of promiscuity, which explains to me why Sydney converted to a more chaste person after her mom passed away. And we hear a few other theories about what's going on. And I was like, I couldn't imagine being 17 and having all this stuff happen to me. And then on top of that, all of the like rumors and just awfulness that people thought and said about me. I would crumble.
Yeah.
Personally. But Sydney's super strong. It's probably because she's a virgin. I'm kidding.
Oh my God. Wow. It's like really deep and really dark at the same time. I like it. I agree. Like, Sydney is so strong. And I think the strength has its limits, right? Like, also, people who are really strong don't automatically react. And I think that's where Sydney's at, right? Like, I'm not in any danger right now. And I just was 13 hours ago. So, was this after the bathroom attack? Like, I just was a few hours ago. So I'm just going to hear all this hateful stuff from the story narrative. I think it helps build the story, while also understanding Sydney's pain, which might come up later, but of understanding this was a new thing for her to hear. But hearing it in the context when she's dealing with so much, right? Of trying to, what's it? That scene I both love and hate. I think it's so ridiculous, but I actually think it's a really insightful and interesting dialogue. Based on the cheerleader says something along the lines of suicide's out this year and homicide's such a much better therapeutic expression. And you're like, oh, shoot. That's super, super messed up, but also really interesting to consider. Like, is she crazy? Is that another angle of this?
Well, that is it for part 1 of this series. Make sure you head on over to wherever you listen to podcasts to listen to part 2. Thanks for listening to Sub Media Reviews. I hope you enjoyed our trip down memory lane just as much as I did. If you have any suggestions for movies or TV shows you'd like me to review next, or if you just want to share your thoughts on today's episode, you can find us on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and Pinterest at Sub Media Reviews, and on submediareviews.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. And if you have a moment, please leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback helps me improve the show and spread the word to new listeners. So until next time, peace out, home slices.